Well, the world comes together in Davos in a sense every single year. We talk about AI, we talk about commerce, we could talk about clean energy. But I dare say the focus this time is about the relation between Europe and the United States and Donald Trump. Is that impacting business at all? The India story is always very important over here. We've got several Indian pavilions over here, lots of Indian business leaders. We've got excellent business leaders and those linked with Indian business right here in the NDTV studio. Rajiv Memani with us, Chandrajit Banerjee and Sanjeev Krishan. Thank you all very much for being with us. Rajiv, I have to ask you the obvious question. How closely are you, as CII President, looking at what might emerge tomorrow with Donald Trump and what he says here?
No, I have not spent any time in predicting. I think it's a futile effort. But clearly, I think it's on the top of the agenda of everyone. I think it's in the interest of the global economy, of the entire world, that I think the relationship between Europe and US, I think, settle down a bit. I think that's the key thing. I think that's the key talking point. From our perspective, I think the way we are looking at it is, how is India doing? How is India faring? And I think there, I would say that both from how our macroeconomic numbers are being looked at, the quality of reforms and the number of reforms that are being done, also the trade diversification that India has done, particularly the comments around the EU deal, UK deal, EFTA, Australia, New Zealand, the strengthening relationship with Middle East. And I think the reindustrialization of India through manufacturing and advanced manufacturing, I think in every interaction that we are having, I think that's being viewed very positively. Obviously, there's always a question on the India-US trade deal. And at least our view is that it's something that, in the next, not in the I think, distant future, I think hopefully, at least if not the entire thing, at least some parts of it should get sorted out.
One of the reasons I was asking about Trump is also because what's happening here has resulted in the global markets being in a bit of a spook. They're scared. Our markets have suffered, the FTSE has suffered as well, and therefore this insecurity that we find in geopolitics is impacting markets around the world. Is that a huge concern for you?
Well, I mean, certainty certainly has a premium. So there's no question about it that when there is so much uncertainty as there is now, markets will behave the way they have. I think, as Rajiv said, I think the conversations around here largely have been on US and Europe in some ways. But, I would actually, without sidestepping your question, I would say that, just the fact that the India-EU deal might get announced very soon, I think is a huge positive that we'll take away from Davos. And from our perspective, again, maybe corroborating what Rajiv said, I think Indian macro has been very, very resilient through 2025. Bunch of reforms which have been done. Even the survey that we released yesterday actually shows that a lot of Indian CEOs are now saying that we want to focus on India, not so much necessarily wanting to align themselves with the global business. And again, the trade basket diversification beyond, some places where there are challenges that India has seen is enormous, including in sectors which are labor intensive. And I think there are many positives that we'll take back from Davos.
Yeah. One of the best aspects of the India story of late is the IMF having projected their numbers, GDP growth numbers for India upwards. And that upward movement comes despite the fact that we continue to suffer from tariffs from America. What does that say about the state of India's economy?
See, Vishnu, we find that capacity utilization in India pretty strong. Sectors after sectors are, investing, adding on to investments, number one. Number two, if you really look at the health of the Indian economy as such, it's resilient, it's strong. If you really look at the way the private sector is doing very well. Second, if you really look at how the banks are today, well flushed, and the health of the banks are much improved than what it was earlier. Next, if you really go in you find the rural demand picking up, which is a very strong piece that we see. The type of reforms that we have seen in India has been just unprecedented, and when we are really looking at the factor of trust, it's what I mean is the trust that Indian government really seems to be having on the private sector and the private capital is very strong, which is leading to a lot in terms of ease of doing business, in terms of decriminalization. You have seen a GST 2.0. You are seeing even areas where we never dared to go in terms of even the states doing their own reforms. So the Indian story is strong, and I am not surprised with the IMF. IMF is coming nearer to the numbers that we have predicted, and so we stand strong. But yes, of course, we can grow double digits, and I'm sure sooner than later India notches up the double-digit mark in terms of growth.
A bit of a cynical question, but does India stand a chance at gaining from the uncertainty globally?
No, I don't think India stands a chance in gaining from uncertainty globally. I think I think the only thing is that globally now everyone is trying to look at partners, trusted relationships, and as what happened when the India-US deal kind of stalled, you also saw an acceleration in India's efforts to do trade deals. It was not that it was not happening, but there was a sense of urgency for sure. I think even in reforms you saw a sense of urgency. I think, we are, honestly, this is an important issue, Vishnu, but I think there is a lot that India can do irrespective of what's happening in the world. I think it's not so much Europe, US and everything. I still personally think that India's biggest challenge is from the east. I think the relationship with US will sort itself out. I think I don't think we need to over obsess about it. I think it will get done in the next 3-4 months, if not earlier. I know there are sectors.
East, you mean China?
Yeah, the East. Yeah, I mean China, because the manufacturing, and rightly so, the amount of manufacturing capacity that they have built up is massive. Their own demand is not that high, right? It's not picked up to that extent, and they are mentally catered to serving the world, and in especially newer areas, in areas which are very critical. I think they have built some, massive scale competitiveness and everything, and we can see in the numbers, in the trade surplus that China has accumulated over $1 trillion. If you look at trade data across every geography minus US, their trade has increased. China trade has increased. So I think India really, if we want to ensure that we fight the AI battle, that we build the advanced manufacturing that we need to, I think the biggest issue is how do we, the reforms that we do internally in terms of ease of doing business, reducing costs, which the government is doing a great job of, and also just more agile on dealing with trade issues, whether it's anti-dumping, whether it's MIPs and others. I think that, to me, if you ask me, is a bigger game changer than what happens between Europe and US, and also to some extent the US trade deal. I think US trade deal is not that important from a trade standpoint, but I think it is important, but I think it's a very broad signal. Sure. And especially when you have a currency which is slightly weak, that signal will have a big impact on that as well.
Sure. I'm going to ask you the same question, all three of you. Keep your answers short because it's a massive question. Budget coming up. What are some of your core expectations or hopes?
So, well, to me, I think most of it has to be on the spending side more than on the collection side, because a lot of that has already happened. And I would say 3 areas. One, boost productivity. I mean, our productivity across services also, but also, of course, we know industrials and agriculture is low. And I think we need to do something to boost productivity in each of the 3 segments. I think that's the first one. Second one is, I think for the longest time, I think we have felt that small is good. I think it's time to now embrace scale and everything that we do, because that is how the factor cost will go down and we will become more competitive. And I think the third thing is, and this is specifically on services, I think we need to focus in a very significant way on upskilling, because that is what will keep the demographic dividend alive and the advantage that we have with our STEM students in course.
So,
top 3 things you expect.
Top 3 things, minusing the ones he has said. If I do, then I'll really bet on the government's taking advantage of the economy and really going in for disinvestment, privatization. We keep talking about it. We've seen some of it, but we need much more of it. We need to walk that talk and get that done. Second, what's going to be important is urban and rural infrastructure. Urban infrastructure is going to become very, very critical. So new cities, I would imagine that we will see that strongly focused upon. I would like.
Don't we really want that to happen?
Yeah, I really want that to happen, and because not only the new cities but also the existing cities, because there will be pressure on the infrastructure there. And lastly, if I can say, what's going to be important is to see, non-agricultural, rural businesses that being encouraged. That is to something non-agricultural opportunities to that, and that's a big segment where we can really look at much more jobs getting from the agri sector into the rural economy.
So, job creation is obviously fundamental in all of this, and associated with job creation is reskilling, not just because of AI, but because it's imperative in whichever part of the economy you're in. Right. So, in terms of expectations in the budget, would you agree that how we plan to reskill at much larger numbers needs to be a priority?
Yeah, it is a priority, and I think it's something which both private sector, public-private partnerships are required for doing that, and I think that has to be. Today, if you meet a lot of the manufacturing companies that are scaling up, if you ask them, do they have the right number of welders, do they have the right number of people on construction and everything else, most of them will say they're struggling to get the people. So yes, AI is the most obvious thing, but I think if you start from a plumber upwards and go, I think there is a mismatch that we have. Sure. And I think that has to be sorted out. I do think that the current labor code, in the way it's being drafted, I think there are formalization of some of this will be helpful. I think it will make it more attractive for people who are in rural India. Maybe they are enjoying the government benefits, don't feel motivated enough to get into the formal sector. Yeah. I think that will also give that impetus. But Vishnu, I think the biggest thing is at CII we've done a very detailed report to say what are the top 50 items that India imports. India imports $550 billion of goods. What are the top 50 so if we can pick up, and once the manufacturing commission, hopefully we should be hearing in the very short term, hopefully that, it's the mandate of that is very clear. If we can have a very clear roadmap for, maybe 30, 40 of those goods, to say what should be, so that we start manufacturing them in India and create that entire value chain and ecosystem. The economic value added to the economy is massive. And I give that example. If you just look at this is what's being imported. But if you talk of data centers, and if you say, okay, 6 gigawatts of data centers are going to come, if you do a backward calculation, if you look at their bill of material, it almost involves 7.5 lakh to 8 lakh crores of imports in the next 5 years' time. Yes. So can we look at those bomb right now and say, okay, which are the 10, 15? You can't start manufacturing chips, but there are a lot of other things that you can start manufacturing or start plan for doing that. And India can become a hub for, Middle East, Southeast Asia, India. That's a massive opportunity. I think government is aware of this. They're driving a lot of this, but I think reforms that encourage manufacturing, I think, are very, very critical. And of course, AI is the other big force multiplier.
We didn't really talk very much about AI, but that's going to be a big focus in conversations going forward. So you've had 3 rail experts talk about what some of the key issues in the budget need to be. Over here in Davos, there's a great deal of uncertainty for the reasons which I've identified. But I think in speaking to Indian industrialists and those associated with industry, it's the relative stability of India as a growing economy, growing GDP rate in this situation that we find ourselves in that is perhaps the India story in Davos 2026.